Saturday night in Chi-Town looking for having a good time, enjoying my life. Isn't that what's supposed to be? Life's a blessing. You might have periods of trial here and there, but not everyday terror. I have friends that grew up in the ghetto, like my friend Jeff King. He grew up in Camden, New Jersey, in the ghetto. Every day wasn't a day of terror. There were here and there incidents, but they were far and few between. Most of the stuff, he went to school, went back, hung out with his friends, played basketball. Even the French Prince of Bel-Air is accurate, like with Will. He go out, play basketball, do that. There's that one incident. Incidents happen very rarely. You don't understand. My friends used to hang out in the projects and that. Even gangbangers know it's bad for business. So they try, unless there's a turf war, but when there's no turf war, like at Green and Green, there were no people getting shot and killed. That was already defined markets, defined places. They secured the buildings. They went in, they did drugs, and they passed out. They didn't roll them, and if any drug addict tried to steal from any other, they would F them up. And seriously, they didn't allow passed out people, druggies, to steal from each other. They would kick the living hell out of them. So they had a well-defined, they wanted their patrons to go there, do their drugs, and leave without incident. And truly, leave without incident. So their patrons, and Andy and Kenny, they're two friends of mine. One went to high school with me, and the other one I met after. But they pass out. They're white kids. It's an all-black project. And they pass out and wake up and then leave. They never had one incident. That was bad for business. So they didn't have to worry of passing out if somebody's going to steal from their pockets or rape them or anything else. Those guys guarded the buildings. And if you attempted to do anything, truly, they would get rid of you. So even all those people jonesing in that, they wouldn't dare. Now, what happened outside and away from the building, they didn't control. But, no. They were, as they told me, they felt very safe. And that's why the girl wrote the book. When they broke it up, they scattered them around everywhere. And it led to Chicago being the murder capital because there was no defined turf. And they gave them housing vouchers and put them over here and put them over there. They didn't even know who was in a gang and who wasn't. And so they spread these gangbangers into these neighborhoods. And what are they going to do? Once they move to the new neighborhood with the housing voucher, they're going to open up operations again. And if there's already an opposing gang, which sometimes they were, well, that's what happened in Chicago. The gang wars. You have to solve the problem. Like they did at Children's. They didn't tear down the hospital. They had to go and remove all the rodents first. In Lincoln Park. Thousands, tens of thousands of rodents they had to take care of. And they did. But they said if they collapsed the hospital, the rodents would flood Lincoln Park with tens of thousands of rodents. So those implosion of those buildings and that, if there's rodents and insects in that, they run and they scatter. Like the buildings down here, it's better to disassemble them. But before they even did that, they had to go in there and take care of the rodent population. I know for a fact, talking to the people. And they went in there and they removed all the rodents. And once that was done, then they started demolishing. They didn't blow it up. They just tore it down floor by floor. But they wouldn't even let the construction workers in. They had people in hazmat suits go in and exterminate the rodent population. And it was tens of thousands of them. They were under the hospital. Now, what does that tell you about hospitals? Like the Michael Reese land. There's a lot of biological waste. Remember, Children's was around for a long time. They didn't take, and all the biological waste went into the basement and wasn't taken care of properly. And it wasn't. How do you think that rodent population built up under the building? And it was under the building. Under the foundation. And it was huge. And they couldn't do it because if they did it, all those people would have sued them royal. See, it wasn't because they wanted to do the right thing, as I was told. It was because they were scared shitless if the building went down and flooded the neighborhood, that every single person in that neighborhood would immediately sue. They would have the largest class action lawsuit on them ever. But if it was a poor neighborhood and those people really don't know how to do recourse correctly, they would have just blown the building and let the rodents flood out. Whatever flooded out. And it would have saved them a fortune. They did it, and this is the Chinatown area, I'll get to my point. They did it because they were scared shitless of class action lawsuits against them, bankrupting them. They did it out of pure fear. So I knew the people, and they told the truth. Truly, they did it out of pure fear. Because if they screwed up, they'd more than likely lose everything. I go to Chinatown, and they don't fear anything. And that's a problem. They don't fear liability. Those workers don't fear liability. I grew up and I understand liability. They don't fear. There's no debtor's jail. So what are you going to do if they're careless and they poison, 20, 50 people, 100 people? You're not getting blood out of a turnip, and they just go bankrupt on the liability. Truly, they just go bankrupt on the liability. What are you going to do? That's why they do it. They're not fear of losing anything. They don't have anything to lose. So, what is your liability? So you have to rely on the owners are well capitalized. And they have good insurance in place. And the owners are scared shitless of losing. That's why you had the ghettos. The people didn't know recourse. And they didn't do Cabrini Green come together and do a class action lawsuit, which they could have, because the housing authority should have brought in law enforcement and increased it until the gangs disappeared. But they didn't. The housing authority allowed the gangs, and they took bribes. Oh, yes. The Public Housing Authority police took lots of bribes from the gangs. And so they allowed them to operate at the Robert Taylor in Cabrini Green and in New York and everything. Truly, the cops that work for the housing authority weren't well trained and took bribes and were scared shitless of the gangs as well. So you get into a situation where you have a law enforcement that can't enforce the law. That's really a joke. And that was the public housing police. They were an incredible joke. It was like the TSA. What do you think they thought ISIS thought of the TSA? They thought they were a bunch of jokes. And so did I. Not highly trained people that were ex-military, that worked in, bomb disposal, bomb detection, that worked in dog units, that sniffed out bombs and explosives and so on. They didn't hire ex-military intelligence to, that specialized in terrorist observation and terrorist vetting and so on. They didn't bring in all those military people, go in somewhere else. They don't even work for Halliburton or something else. A few of them did, like my roommate who was a Ranger. He went to Iraq and worked for Halliburton. But they just let them go, and they go into some other field, and they do. All that training right down the freaking tubes. They don't come police officers. Like my friend Jimmy Quinn, he had all that specialized. He was worked in the prison as a prison guard in Nebraska for just a short period of time. Truly. He worked in the prison as a prison guard, but he had medals, tons of medals, and all kinds of specialized training. He could have ran the guards at the prison. But he got out of it and he went into welding. And he worked for Kawasaki in Nebraska because he had a specialized welding. And he worked for them building trains. And their backlog for trains was like 20 years. Truly, it was incredible. But all that specialized training, they can go to work for the TSA in that. What do you think people in Israel, the Israelis didn't even do it well. They had military people that worked in the airport. As my friend told me, he got off the plane and there was Israeli military with an Uzi automatic standing there when he got off in the airport. But the Israelis didn't even employ their own military or Mossad to work in the airports. Hired by the airports to do their security and set up their protocols and everything else and set up their security intelligence, ex-Mossad, ex-intelligence agents working in the airport, setting up their security, going in, how to pick out and identify terrorists and everything else. We just throw it down the drain. So did the Israelis. But at least they had military personnel that was separate from airport security, did work in the airport. We can have the National Guard work in the airport. It's not only the U.S. military, the National Guard. So all our airports could have the airport TSA security, which you have to be ex-military, ex-National Guard, a requirement. And if you're not, you can't be hired. And they say, here you go into the military. The Army Reserve, you can do that up to 44 now. You want to be hired? Go join the Army Reserve. Get some specialized training in this field. And then come back once you're done. And we'll hire you. Then you go into our training. But the National Guard can be a separate thing, working the airports separately. So the airport security is one, and then you have redundancy, National Guard. And they work the airports, and they can work the regional airports. The National Guard can work all the regional airports. All those small community airports can be all run by the National Guard. There's more than enough National Guard. And they run the small regional airport security, all the National Guard. So the state of Illinois National Guard, the New York National Guard, all the regional airports, the train stations and all that, they run in the state like the Texas National Guard. It's redundancy. They work together as a team, but it's redundant. They make sure that airport security aren't any bad guys, and the airport security makes sure that the National Guard aren't any bad guys. They're a separate entity working together for a common cause, but it's a check and balance. And you want to create checks and balances. But I go into Chinatown and it's a joke. So they can get all these people sick and everything else, and it doesn't matter. You're not going to get anything. And that's why they don't care. They don't keep it clean because they have nothing to lose. Fine me, whatever. So, again, they have to have skin in the game and be able to be afraid to lose something. Or you hire truly godly people that truly fear God. There are monks and everything that take vows of poverty that are highly diligent, that would never do anything wrong. But they fear God greatly. They want to go to heaven. And so you have to do something about it. There has to be a balance. There has to be check and balance. Is one side fears the other side, and both sides, what? Like Republicans and Democrats, they have all the investigations and so on. Well, in a way, that's very good, because one side respects the other side, because if they do something wrong, they're going to take them to court right away. They're going to call for a special investigation. So I agree with all that. At least that kept it from blowing up worse than it was. Truly. Because we didn't have the ethical screenings and everything that we should have. The DNC was corrupt, as Hillary Clinton showed with Bernie Sanders. And the reason I'm here is the 78, they can build out a new Chinatown in the 78. Part of the 78 development, and I'm going to go up here and then come back around so you can see it. They should build out a new Chinatown. Truly. Whole new Chinatown, and they can demolish that garbage. It's right here, right where the Chinatown was. And they can give them the state-of-art, modern everything. And it can be beautiful. And they can scrap that whole Chinatown and develop it into something else. But I think they build a whole new Chinatown in the 78. It's no big move for them. Bring them out of the ghetto and just get rid of that mall and everything else. It's really not worth renovating in that way. So either you're going to scrap it, or you're going to do a demolition. You're going to close off half the mall, demolition it, build it, and then take the other half. So half operates, other half they'll have to wait till it's done. And then you just give them a stipend for that other and reallocate the workforce somewhere else. That's what my Indian friend did that owned the restaurants. She basically gave her employees a stipend, and she demolished her place and rebuilt it. And all her staff came back. If not, they went on unemployment, but she also gave them a stipend above unemployment. And you can cut a deal with unemployment. Cut a deal with unemployment. You pay as an employer into unemployment. And you need to demolition your place. And you're going to go send your employees to training. And they're going to use the Pell Grant or the job work credit training. And they're going to do some more advanced training while you demo your place, and they're going to be on unemployment and state continuation for health. And then you're going to give them a subsidy on top of that. And then they can demo the place. They can upgrade in their training. Whether you're Home Depot, it's the same thing. You want to demolish the store, and you want to keep the employees. You don't want them going to work for somebody else and having to rehire. You want them to train while the store is down and being rebuilt. So you work with the government, and you can, unemployment, use it, and you're going to hire them back. But you as the employer, and it's purely employer paid. They pay the SUNA, the state and federal unemployment tax. The employer pays both state and federal unemployment tax. And you have a deal with unemployment, and they can go on unemployment. It's a layoff. And you're going to rehire. Unemployment pays for layoffs. And you're going to be the one that's rehiring them. And then you can give them an independent subsidy above the unemployment. And they can get COBRA, since it's a larger, or a state continuation. But again, if it's an operation like those restaurants in China, they qualify for the Obama healthcare subsidy, and they pay, and it includes gap insurance. It's total premium, and the gap insurance is embedded, and it can be embedded, and you embed the gap. Now, you can only use it one time, and it's for something serious. Besides that, you're going to use your HSA, but if you're going to blow through your whole premium, that's when you use the gap insurance. Truly, you break a leg or something like that serious, then the gap insurance covers the premium. But it's for something serious. That's why gap insurance is so cheap. People aren't breaking their legs continuously every day. Truly. So gap insurance is really cheap. But it's not for I got the flu or something like that, or I need to go to the doctor. That's the HSA, the FSA. They pay for it. And here, what are they going to integrate here with Pacific Gardens with the 78th development? They need to do something about this other train yard. Truly. And they need to work with Pacific Gardens. Truly. They need to employ these people. And truly, the 78 needs to employ all these people and work with them in their community. Even if this comes a full-blown church, and it can be a boarding school for children, it can. They can turn this into a youth boarding school, a Christian school. It's a Christian school and boarding school. It has its kitchen, it has its mess hall, it has its chapel, it has other facilities. And it has housing, perfect to be a dormitory. Truly. Or they can turn into a seminary. And they have boarding for the seminarians. Truly. It can turn into a seminary then. If they want to do, older individuals. And they can turn it into a seminary. And you have housing and everything else. And they can focus on international students if they want. Bring them in, they get housing and everything else. And, and you have the chapel and everything else, and then you have the classrooms. It has places to have the classrooms and everything else. And it can turn into a seminary program. But this mall is going to boom. This whole area is going to boom. See, the problem with this is Michigan Avenue, where you have Museum Park and all that. Those people don't come down here. They go that way to the financial district. I know this because I studied the patterns living here. I went to the expressway because I lived in Logan Park. So I go down to Roosevelt, get on the expressway, get off at Western. But again, I had to. These people, like my ex Jennifer and all the people I knew, They go straight down Michigan Avenue or State, right to the financial district and that. They don't come down here at all. When they're shopping, they have the Jewel over there, but they don't really use that Jewel. They go to the one by Northwestern, the Whole Foods. Because that Jewel is not the people that live in the neighborhood. That was considered the richest neighborhood. When I lived there with Jen, it was considered the richest neighborhood in the state of Illinois. Museum Park, Museum Campus, Central Station, the richest. The richest per income. It outdid Bannockburn. Now, Bannockburn's a small community, but that was the richest area in the state. Bannockburn, Illinois was number one at one time. Now, there's not a lot of residents, and they own big properties, but the people that live there were ultra wealthy. And so Bannockburn, but that outdid Bannockburn. But they don't come down this way. But when you open the 78, they're going to change their tendencies. And this area with all of this stuff, they don't market to them. And that is a high income neighborhood. You ever been back on the houses that are in Indiana? Now, Indiana is cut off by the train, but if you go on the other side or the south side of Indiana, so you have to go down, south side of Prairie. If you go down Indiana under the train and then make a right or a left, I should say, go east to Prairie, and then you'll see all these very expensive houses. But, most people don't see that. It's really, cut off because of the train and everything else. And so it's like its own little area. It's very isolated, but the houses are worth millions. And that goes into that area being, one of the most high-end areas. It was. Now, I don't know if it still is, but the highest-end area in the state of Illinois. So, the new post office is coming in. So, whatever this, I think this should be cryptocurrency central. I had ideas for that, but this is right by, and it can expand the financial markets and all that. Getting, these firms to move in, like BMO, Bank of Montreal. BMO is Bank of Montreal. So there's Bank of Montreal and Harris Bank. They're two Canadian banks. John Hancock is owned by Manulife, a Canadian company. And this new post office here, I don't know what it's going to be, but this is going into the 78th project. So this is going into the 78 project. The new post office is right here on the south side of the street. The old post office is right here on the north side of the street. And so this parking garage and all this, I don't know what they're going to do with. But again, this feeds right into, it's right into Wacker Drive. All the financials, all that stuff is right there. It's a perfect expansion, and it works right into the 78. And as you see, I'm passing over the river. All of this is connected via water taxi. And there was by the Merck, there was a helicopter pad to land on the river that Boeing did. I think there was a helicopter pad that went out into the river, and they could land the helicopter behind the building. But again, this goes into the 78. So you have to look at how this is in affect all the rest of the area. And if I go up this street and I go left, the one I'm approaching, but I'm going to go right down Wells. If I go left, I end up in the financial district. So going down this area here, this goes back in here. This is River City, and they did do the new expansion on the front side. And now they built another new building as well. So they built out this area, and they putting a park in between. I don't know, but they could. Nice, beautiful green space in between. But again, this goes down, and what you want to do here is poking that. You don't want this to dead end anymore. Truly. This street dead ends up here, and I'll go all the way down. This is River City, where I am right here with those blue lights in the river. That was originally here, River City, because it's on the river. And it has boat docks and everything else, and you could own a boat and live here. And, you know, the boat docks go right underneath. So this goes all the way down, and you have the Roosevelt collection. But the thing is, for this is the backside, and people don't know this from the Roosevelt collection, that they can come down here and park. So they get up to the shopping mall. This backside doesn't look good. It's not attractive. It doesn't show any shops. It says big AMC right there, but it really doesn't show any of the shops. Do you think, does this make you want to come and park here and go shopping? No. It's not inviting at all. You know, you have to make this not look like the ghetto. So, again, this right here is the 78. And so this has to go through. And so I'm going to turn around here. But, let's see. Now open. Leagues open, play court, sport bridge. But this is the 78 project, and you want this to go all the way through, and I'll take you back around, but you want to build a new Chinatown. So but you have all this extra space right here. Let me show you. See this? What is this going to be? And that seems some kind of, I think that's a power generation. But this is a whole backside. I don't know, a beautiful park might be nice. A huge big park like that little park between. I don't know what they plan on making this into. But truly, it can be just some beautiful green park. That adds significant value as well. So, I guess they're doing something. Dam plumbing. But, again, looks like they're doing a little bit. But this is River City. And it has a circular look. So, something, River City, and they said something about aliens or something. It looked like there used to be a Bally's gym in here. So I used to go work out in the gym downstairs. The personal trainers that work for Belly, a black female and black male, and then all the people that worked there out there were black. Truly, I never ran into any problems with them. I used to work out there early in the morning, and there was a bunch of mostly black dudes, and then I hung out with an Arab guy, Chris, or not an Arab, Indian guy, Kumar. I think he was Indian or Pakistani, and then his friend was an Asian girl, and I forget her name. She was awesome, super sweet girl. I haven't seen her in a long time. But I think she was a nurse or something, but super sweet. And Chris died. And I think he died because of pesticides. Because there was a lot of cockroaches in his building, and I went into his place, and him and his brother, Kumar, and Kumar was their firm. And they did the medical residence. all they did was the UIC, or UI Health, University of Illinois Health. They call it UI Health, but it's really UIC Health. It's part of the University of Illinois Chicago, not the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana. It's Champaign-Urbana, 2 communities up there. But anyways, they only did taxes for medical residents. And they could have converted those residents if they stayed around here. When they became full-fledged doctors, they could have continued on. But the most of all the medical residents they did were Indian, because there was a bunch of Indians that went to UI Health. University of Illinois Chicago, its medical school and its residency program is really good. And a lot of Indians go to the medical school at University of Illinois Chicago. And they do residency. And so Kumar and Kumar did taxes for the medical students, the medical school students, and they did taxes for the residents. And just basically Indian or Pakistani. And that was their whole business. But I go into their place, and the building had incredible cockroach issues. And they had this white powder all over the place. And I forget what Chris died of. But he was an incredible racquetball player. I played him in racquetball. And that guy, he could place the ball. Incredible. It was close games. But I did it because I was just way more physically fit than him. He wasn't that physically fit, but his precision and the way he placed the ball was incredible. And like I said, and he used to come in there, and we used to play racquetball and talk, and then the little Asian girl hung out with him, and I don't know where she is. He died. She's still alive, and his brother's still alive. So the other Kumar is still alive. But here's the 78, and they can build a whole new Chinatown, and I'll go down on the other side. But why wouldn't you? Part of the development, you need to fill it out. Well, why don't you just relocate to Chinatown? And super modernized and everything else, and you could develop that other into something else. So you would just move all the businesses there into the new one. So they would be all of them would relocate into this. So, again, and then they have to build out this infrastructure, but again, this is kind of cool. It's something Rahm Emanuel wants, Chicago Rising. And I don't understand, like in Hollywood, you don't have to have crime to make lots of movies. They make all kinds of movies, and they didn't have any of that type of crime. That came later with the drugs. And that was more in East LA, because I've been to Los Angeles many times. And they reinvented the city, and they moved out the homeless, and truly, and you don't have to move them out. What do? You give them opportunity. It's a stepping stone, so you make them part of the development, so they get job training and in positions, and the development further builds out their skill, and so they become a apprentice, and so they become an apprentice, and you bring them in, and they become a grunt and an apprentice, and they're going to school on the outside, and they're doing apprentice work with it. So they got field work and school work, and it puts them in a trade. And so instead of throwing them out, you embrace them, and you give them a pathway, and you need it. You set up temporary housing for them. Truly, you set up temporary housing, and you employ them all, and you have people coming in that are willing to mentor them. Part of it, they have to take on somebody they mentor to be part of the project. Truly, the firms are told that they have to, and they can hire them. They're allowed to hire them if they want afterwards. So it's an internship for them as well. They get training outside. They got to finish their educational outside. They get a mentorship program. And then it's also / intern program. And then like Walsh Construction or McHugh Construction or whatever can hire them if they want to hire them. If not, they don't want to work for them. Maybe they want to go somewhere else. Okay, that's fine. But it's a means to an end, so they're never homeless again. So that's the point. So they're going to have to redevelop this, and the hotels and that are going to get a lot more business. So you have all the hotels up here. And so you have the Marriott and that. And so this is going to put, more people in the Hyatt and the Marriott and the Hampton and all that, because you come down to see a game like, say, the FIFA, since they're doing soccer, or MLS, like the Green Bay Packer fans and the St. Louis Cardinals. When the Cardinals come to town, and usually they try to make the Cardinals series not weekdays. And this is what Major League Baseball needs to do better. The regional series needs to be weekdays, but when they're playing weekends. So when they're playing the St. Louis Cardinals, it can be a Friday, Saturday, Sunday series, or Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Truly. If they're going to have a 4-game series, a 3-game series, Friday, Saturday. Why? Because all the St. Louis fans come down to Chicago and book hotel rooms. Just like when the Cubs are going up to St. Louis, they play on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So they swap out weekends. But when they're playing the Los Angeles Dodgers or the New York, Mets and that, those people are too far away. They don't really travel much. You have it during the weekday. But the teams around them, like when they're playing the Milwaukee Brewers, those games are on weekends, not weekdays. So the Major League Baseball has to do that schedule like it. It's the same thing. You would do it for basketball, that in hockey, that like the St. Louis Blues playing the Chicago Blackhawks would be on a weekend. So people will come down from St. Louis to Chicago, and people will go up to St. Louis and spend the weekend from Chicago. So if Major League Sports does this, it fills the hotels, and then they can take in the attraction, because hockey, they're only going to play one game, and they can set it up where they play. Is there a Wisconsin hockey team? No. But anyways, I don't think Milwaukee doesn't have a hockey team. But again, there's one in Ohio. So when they come down, they play the other game. So you get people from Wisconsin and Ohio in for the weekend. As an example. So you do that with Major League Sports, and that creates interstate commerce. Because if you do it in the weekday, people can't travel because they have work responsibilities. But if you set it up for Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Major League Soccer does it the same way. So the close proximity games, they're, on the weekends, and when they're playing Los Angeles or some things that are farther away, or playing Seattle or whatever, you have those during the weekdays, because people go home and watch them on TV. So they get more audience on TV, and what happens? It's good for the businesses, because they get more action on the weekends then. So they really, pack up on the weekends, and they still have out-of-town series, but it's more local crowds than that. And so it's good for the local fans, and it's good for traveling fans. So, you get a lot of local business during the week, and you get a lot of out-of-town business on the weekends, the way it's supposed to be. And so you can set it up there with your sporting venue. And so if the Bears move over here to the Michael Reese facility, they move down here, and it's good for McCormick and that they can interface in. And so, this whole thing is part of, these projects are all interconnected. So it's really, this Bronzeville project goes all the way down to Hyde Park. Hyde Park is moving towards Bronzeville. Hyde Park is moving north and south. They're building out, expanding southward, and they're expanding north and east and west towards the lake and away from the lake. But it's interconnected with the same thing with the Bronzeville. This is all Bronzeville. And so the Michael Reese, the Bears would integrate with Bronzeville, which would integrate with Hyde Park, which integrates with the 78, which integrates, I'll show you the other development. These all integrate with each other. And it's really a incredible redevelopment of Chicago. So this is the Michael Reese area, and you have this. So this is all Michael Reese right on Martin Luther King Drive. And right next to the stadium, you have Advocate Outpatient Center. It's perfect to have a hospital right next to a sporting stadium. And it's not too far. Both Northwestern and that are not too far from the soccer stadium either. So if an athlete gets hurt, they can rush them over, and it should have a trauma setup. It's outpatient, but it should have a trauma setup. If they build the stadium, it needs to have a trauma setup, a trauma unit, a class 1 trauma unit. So if the player gets seriously hurt, it's only minutes right over here. It's literally minutes to take the player from there over to here, the Advocate Outpatient with level 1 immediate care, level 1 trauma center. So this is McCormick Place, the sign says over there, metal, but that's Bronzeville. But here's McCormick Place, and so you're really going to integrate these projects into each other, and it's really a whole redevelopment of the South Side. Truly. And this is a great recruiting tool from, so from downstate and other places, surrounding states. There's all kinds of universities within Illinois and the surrounding states and those kids come from many other places besides those states, and they might just want to settle in this area. So you're able to draw from, all the schools in the Midwest. You would recruit them to come live in this area. So you're going to get undergraduate. It's not just undergraduate. You're going to get undergraduate, graduate, PhD. And so that means graduate students or law students, medical students, and many others that are going to come down this way. So yeah, picking up the pipe. I'm not going to do it right now. So again, that project, let me show you the other project. And I'll show you the area. This is Indiana. And I'll show you what I was talking about on Prairie. It's right here on the other side of the Wintrust. So these are all, multi-level buildings, but you have houses, and they're back here. So Prairie gets cut off by the train, but you have all these houses back here. So remembering, but there's all these houses right here. So these are residents. I don't know if they're multi-units now, but these are all residents back here. And so there's no outlet because it gets cut off by the train up here, but there's units down that way, and I'll loop back around. But this is Prairie on the other side. I lived on the north side. This is the south side. See, there's all these houses. This is what I was talking about. See all these residents right here, straight down? There's a bunch of houses down here that you just don't know about, but beautiful residents. And so a little bit of ice, traction control. But again, this is a great little area. There's more residents down this way. And I'll just go down this way. But it's very tranquil. It's very quiet. And it's right off McCormick Place. And it's right by the Wind Trust and everything. So, this is Calumet. So it's a nice place to live. And there's more residents to the left and high-rise buildings where I had friends live. So you can see the high-rise buildings down this way. There's some nice high-rises, and and then we're just gonna go down this street right here. So, and again, this leads right into McCormick Place. And then you have the crosswalk that connects the two sides of McCormick. That's straight ahead. So I'll zoom in on it. That's to keep people inside right here and out of the bad weather. Right there. So you can see it. Not the greatest of cameras. But, again, maybe need to get a better phone. But again, we're on the backside of the Wind Trust Arena where DePaul plays, which I think UIC plays. If DePaul stays here, UIC should still play here. University of Illinois Chicago should play at the Wind Trust Arena. This is where the Chicago Sky plays, but also UIC women's basketball team, UIC's women's volleyball team, UIC's men's volleyball team, DePaul's men's volleyball team, DePaul's women's volleyball team. They can have badminton team play here, truly. And then you can have ping pong here. You roll out the ping pong tables onto the floor, and you can have all kinds of ping pong tournaments at the Wind Trust. Co-ed, male, female, and it becomes a collegiate sport. And, it's a big sport in China and Europe. Ping pong is huge in Europe and China. And so they can have teams for DePaul and UIC. And so their programs can, occupy Wind Trust, 7 days a week between those two colleges and the Chicago Sky. And what happens with that? It brings down the cost of the Chicago Sky to operate at Wind Trust. But then you can bring in women's and men's professional volleyball indoor. And so, and if they want, they can, convert it and make an ice arena too. And have DePaul and UIC's hockey teams. That's what they did at United Center. They have the Hawks and the Bulls. Well, they can make that into an ice arena as well. And then you can bring in all the figure skating sports and everything. So DePaul and UIC can have, figure skating teams, and then speed skating and all that can be done in Wintrust. If you, put the ice arena under and the floor above, so it can be incredible. And so for UIC and DePaul, they can just share it then. If they're going to do it that way, that's fine. It's a long way off from, but they can take LSD. You go from Fulton Avenue right up to LSD right down here. And you can have specialized shuttle from DePaul for the students, faculty, and all that can take the buses up for, all the sporting events. And then UIC, it's on Roosevelt, and all you do is take Roosevelt up and then straight down Michigan Avenue south, and then up whatever street that is where UIC is. Where Wintrust is. But it's right down the street. And then there's a private Christian high school down there. I think St. Ignatius or something like that. And they can use it, the high school as well. It's a huge Christian high school. And they can have all kinds of, big tournaments there. When they're having, like state tournaments for volleyball or something else, or regional, or they have the Chicago Championship in football. That the Public League Championship? It's only for high schools in Chicago. They have the Public League, 8A, 7A, 6A, and that's separate from the state championship. So they have the Chicago Public League Championship. So they can have that for baseball. It's not only for football. They can have it for volleyball and that. And they can have the Chicago Public League Championships for volleyball, for men's and women's basketball at Wintrust. The Chicago Public League Championship for basketball. So, again, they can have that at Wintrust. Here's the other development that's going to come in. And this is going to go over the rail yards. So you can't really see. I'll try, but all this is rail yards and you can't really see it. But this is another development that's tying in to the other developments. And this is right across the street from Soldier Field. See all the buildings up there? And so this is going to be another development, putting the trains on there. And this brings up all their real estate. Why? Because once the train lines get built on top of, it becomes super quiet. Super quiet. It brings down none of the train noise, none of the train bells, none of that. And when they do it, they should take away all the vibration. The tracks should absorb all the vibration. You don't want vibration from the trains when they're moving through to feed into the structure you're building above it, because that's destabilizing. That causes all kinds of cracks. So you want to absorb all the vibration from the trains when they move. No wind vibration, no ground vibration, truly. And any noise, you want to absorb it all, dampen it, redirect it, and you can turn it into energy. Grab all the vibration, turn it in to power the underground tunnel. Part of the power for the underground tunnel. But these houses even because they're building in front of you, you say they're losing one way. Yeah, they're losing a little bit in one way, but they're gaining in another. It'll be beautiful if they do the building structure. They can, position the buildings correctly where they can share views and, create this incredible skyline effect and make it super quiet like it is now. And so, again, and this feeds in right here to the McCormick Center. All those red lights in that is the backside of the McCormick Center. So you would want to spruce this up, make it look a little bit more inviting if you're going to do the project. And this is where the people that live in Museum Park, Central Station, they get on the train. So if you work here in Museum Park, or you live in Central Station and you're taking the metros right there. So it can take you, and if eventually they build up their efficiencies in that, they can move you, in and out of Chicago rapidly. It's a great place to live, and so, cutting down on highway traffic. That means it's a good thing cutting down the highway because it speeds up the movement on the highway for everybody that uses it. So they don't sit idling on the highway, and the people that use the highway can move through without running into heavy congestion. And so it works perfectly. And so this is Museum Park. And again, if you're going to do things, there's a boatyard and everything up here. You're going to do something to spruce up this area. All these developers that are doing that want to spruce up everything around it. They want to do a little bit of reinvesting in the greater community around it so the area becomes even more beautiful. You don't want to be the most beautiful place, truly, and the other places aren't so, because you want to make it a destination so they don't seem like they're on an island. And that's what happened when they did the South Loop, and those people didn't hang out there and they just went everywhere else because they felt like they were on an island. I lived there when it first got developed. And so it was like being on an island. You went there to go to sleep, and it was a great little neighborhood to sleep in, and then you left. You didn't stick around the area. So revitalizing it gets people to create more community and everything else. And so all those projects tie right into Museum Park. The 78 and the railroad project and all of them tie in. And like I said, they should move Chinatown into the 78. And so, again, moving Chinatown into the modern age, and then they can redevelop that community, which it needs to be redeveloped. So again, this is the whole Museum Park, so this all ties in, and you got the Shedd Aquarium and all of them down there. So again, and this is all on the lakefront. So this is a total lakefront and Riverwalk development. All those projects at 78 is to expand the Riverwalk. And so you got the casino coming in on the river and that, and all that, the Lincoln Yards projects on the river. So you're expanding the Riverwalk all the way down, and that can be a jogging and biking and boating on the river, kayaking, and all kinds of water sports, paddle boating, and so on. So you can really get recreational use out of the river, which you couldn't before, because they're cleaning it up and that, and so it can, be good for all kinds of water sports. And I do believe the guys that are doing the drones and looking for cars and all that stuff and cleaning up the bottom of the river, moving out large chunks of debris that were dumped in the river, looking for waste barrels, Like, they found Lake Mead, they found all these people. They found some bodies dumped in barrels, but they also found that people dumped a lot of waste in barrels, toxic waste in barrels, into Lake Mead, into the water supply. So, scanning and removing any toxic waste in that, so those drones can, as they're doing the mapping, they can also look for any hotspots for contamination. People that metal barrels or, dumped radioactive material or large quantities of biological waste or whatever. They can look for that and, remove it from the bottom of the river, and they should be looking for it in the lake. Who knows what people dumped in the Lake Michigan? Watch Dexter. He takes his boat out and he dumps all the bodies in the ocean. We had the Chicago Mafia here. So if they do it in New York, which they did it, they go out and dump bodies in the ocean, and they did it in Miami, and they did it in New Orleans, and they, ran cars, they dumped cars into it. And I'm watching the Lazarus Project, and he's dumping a body in the river. And then we have the Green River Killer, who dumped bodies in the river. And then the Mexican Mafia, they dumped tons of bodies in the Rio Grande. And I would assume if the Mexican Mafia did, then the Mexican gangs and cartels, they dumped lots of bodies in the river. Because if you don't know, I read all these, and I didn't. And then I started publishing it about all the body parts they found in the Rio Grande River. And lots of them, they found male, but a lot of them were females that were discarded, I guess, from the Mexican Mafia, that were used in sex trade. I don't know about organ. They could have been in the organ trade, but they found lots of female body parts. And so those were lots of females that were, for one reason or another, discarded. And so they dumped the bodies in the Rio Grande. So they found the leg here, arms, hands. I don't know about heads. They might have. But you can dig up the stories. I did. And so, we can redevelop this, and now we have the DNA testing, and we can use the Mexican database for driver's licenses and that, and passports, Mexican citizens that had passports, Mexican citizens that were residents in the United States, and we can go through the database and try to match those bodies. So if we get a hand or a leg, we can just regenerate what they look like, and then go through the databases to find out who they were. So that's why every citizen, young and old, has to have a state ID minimum. And it should be the same way in Mexico. So everybody's in the database. So, and any people getting kidnapped in that. And so when Ebola goes out, like in Canada and that, it goes out to all the airports and border, and it goes into the U.S. as well. Because they can cross over from Canada to the United States. So when they, do this, and the same thing with Mexico, we have to have an interchange with Mexico and Canada. Because I told you, a lot of car thieves, and believe I publish stuff, taking stolen stuff into Mexico and taking stolen stuff into Canada. Well, if they're taking stolen stuff from the United States into Mexico and Canada, think about that. They probably take stolen stuff from Canada into the United States and Mexico. Stolen stuff from Mexico into the United States and Canada. Because the greatest way is just to steal it and bring it across the border, or two borders, since we're right here, like NAFTA trade. Well, criminals think the same way, so they bring it over here. There's no record. Insurance companies and that don't exchange, and so they just move it across the border. It's just like here, missing people and that, say kidnapped from Canada, and they're in the United States, they're not on any database. They're not any missing. They got them in Canada. They're not looking for them in the United States or Mexico. So, it's just easy to do that. Move them around that way, and it's easy to hide them that way. So once you get them across the border, out of sight and out of mind. Why do you think gangsters, and I've talked a lot, they don't poop where they eat? Here I'm going to turn into the Chicago Yacht Club. But the reason they do that is they don't want police around them. They don't want attention in their areas. And they don't want other people doing criminal activities around them, because that brings heat. They like it very quiet, very tranquil. And so they do everything far away from where they live. They don't want attention around their house. They don't want their family being under surveillance and so on and so forth. So this is what they do. Like, they were taking the train up from the south side and going into Wrigleyville to rob people, and then taking the train back to the south side. Well, the police in Wrigleyville, they're looking for somebody who lives around Wrigleyville. But it wasn't anyone around Wrigleyville. They lived all the way on the south side. And the police on the south side the Bolo's not looking for them on the south side of Chicago. So they go up, they rob, just like the Chicago cops that were jewelry thieves. They went up to Lake Forest and Wilmette and Glencoe and all those, Northbrook, and they broke into residents there. They're Chicago police. The Northbrook, Lake Forest aren't looking for pictures of Chicago police officers, but they were Chicago police officers that ran a jewelry ring, stealing from all kinds of high-end houses on the North Shore forever, and got away with it. And I don't know how Berg got caught, but I think he got caught because they keep up the presence of them doing their job, which they weren't. They illegally imprisoned people, and the Innocent Project got some people off that were tortured and forced into confession. Now, they were criminals. They were easy patsies. They already had, a record. So it was easy to pin stuff on them. So when they went to court in that, they already had something for stealing, this or doing this type of crime. And so what's the best person to frame? If you have an incident with a pedophile, well, find another pedophile that lives in the vicinity and frame them. And so I tell people, and people that have done these things, you're very easy targets to set up. And so they can frame you very easy, and that's what they did. They took people that had a history of doing certain things, that didn't do that particular crime, and charged them with the crime. They were still criminals, but when they went in, the prosecutor, say, well, this person has a long rap sheet, and, he's not a credible witness, and him saying it was a forced confession is garbage, and he's lying. Truly. And who does the jury think? Like, this guy, he's had 5-6 offenses. I'm not going to believe him that the cops forced a confession out of him. This guy has a history, a serious criminal history. And that's what they did. And it made him look like they were award-winning cops, because he got all praise for the amounts of, arrest and solving crimes and that. He wasn't solving shit. He was just looking who he could pin it on and pick that person up and pin the crime on him. And it was perfect cover for the jewelry heist and that. So they could focus on, figuring out what houses they were going to rob and do all that stuff. And, it looked like they had a good clearance rate in that, and like they were doing their job. They weren't doing their job at all for decades. They just faked it. And so they put a lot of people in jail that were already criminals in jail. But not for the crimes they did. for a crime they didn't do. But they already committed crimes, making them big, easy patsies. The best patsy is somebody that already has a history, like Lee Harvey Oswald. He's a great patsy. You say he already had affiliation with the Communist Party and this and that. Well, that makes for an ideal patsy. Not saying he was, but his whole profile makes him an ideal patsy. So again, I believe in a greater conspiracy. They don't. But I believe he fits the perfect profile of a patsy because he had these things. He spent time in Cuba and so on. And it makes it very easy to say he was a lone wolf. And that, and it fits a scenario. And I don't think he was a lone wolf. But now that Russia, with Putin and that, getting into the KGB and the East German archives, and that's what sucked about falling the wall, is they didn't secure all those intelligence agencies in the Eastern Bloc, and they had all kinds of operations running and cells running in that. What happened to all those records from the East German police and all the operations that were working with the KGB and that? Because part of it is there needs to be a serious unearthing. And they can do this all in the Security Council because Russia, China, and the U.S., and they can have their own top secret and disclosures to solve some of the shit that went on that was in the past so we can move forward in a better world. But they need to have their own internal cleansing that's not public, but truly they get them on page and see if, how many times did we try to kill Castro? If we did, how many times? Truly, how many times did the CIA try to kill Castro, and how many times did they try to kill him? All that stuff needs to come out. And that way they can protect themselves and they can work together as a team. But you have to set a new foundation of trust. And we would like to know if they were involved. Did the CIA try to kill, any of the Russian leadership? Truly. So these things don't need to be public, but they need to sit down and truly have open and honest discussions and open the records. So I wonder what, with all those archives that went on, that because they had all kinds of special police in all those Eastern Bloc countries, and they were running all kinds of intelligence operations. And so I would really like to know, what did they do in Western